Hello, a very warm welcome to episode 22. We are covering in this episode chapter 5 of the Bhagavad Gita. Sister Denise has been sharing her understanding of not just the text but the practical application of what is contained in the shlokas with us. And in that light, I welcome Sister Denise back to today's show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Sister Denise, on the previous occasion, we were going through shloka number 13 when we ran out of time. So I just want to go through it again so that the viewer is able to get the thread of what we were speaking. Number 13 reads, renouncing all actions with the mind. I think you covered that in the last episode. The embodied one sits happily as the ruler within the city of 9 gates, not acting at all, nor causing action. What is the city of 9 gates?
Well, the city of 9 gates is your body, and the gates are the orifices of your body. So your eyes, your nostrils, your mouth, your ears, and any other holes that there may be. They are the city of 9 gates.
The embodied one sits happily as the ruler. Why is it important to be the ruler?
Well, either you're the ruler or you're the slave. And so you don't want to be a slave.
Would you say that the state that humanity has reached right now, we are all enslaved by the 9 gates?
Absolutely, yeah, because whatever you see immediately affects your mind, changes your mood, causes you to act a certain way. So we're very reactive people on the whole. And so what you hear, what you smell, what you feel, where the mind is completely enthralled to the sense organs. And so the person who's the ruler is really the enlightened one who has power of yoga and who determines with the power of discrimination what thoughts, what perceptions the soul will entertain and what it will not entertain, so that you are really the master and you decide what happens and what doesn't happen.
Now, Sister Denise, how did mankind reach this condition? Were we always like this? And by that I mean enslaved? Were we rulers once?
Well, yes, I think we were rulers once. And I think that, the angle on the development of a person, the evolution of a person that I have, which is very much a product of my study of Rajyoga with the Brahma Kumaris, is that there was a time when we were completely filled with yoga power. The soul was absolutely in its own power. And then by bringing the energy of the soul into motion through action through the body, over the course of many lives, the soul actually lost power. And a time came when it flipped over from being powerful to being weak. And it became more and more weak. And as the soul lost power, lost self-awareness, it came under the influence of matter, which it can experience through the sense organs. And so this is why it says so much in the Gita that the soul is caught up in the sense organs and the objects of sense perception.
Sister Denise, you see, what interests me about what you just said is when something goes wrong in our lives, okay? When somebody behaves in a wretched manner, where life sends you a knock that's very hard to deal with, we tend to not look at ourselves, we tend to look for blame in people and things. So my question to you in this context is, what is the signs of enslavement? How do you know whether you're enslaved or not? Is every single person on the planet enslaved?
I think it would be safe to say, if not everyone, then definitely the majority. And those who are not enslaved, I would say they must have really done a lot of personal work. A sign of being enslaved is something like when you say, you made me angry.
It's a very common thing, Sister Denise, to lay blame at the door of whomsoever is standing in front of you for what you're feeling. You know, this person didn't greet me this morning, I was so upset. The person did nothing, and yet you feel upset. So take us from there into what is meant by being a ruler. How do you make that transition?
I think the ruler has to be very fast, because something occurs in the material world. You perceive that through your sense organs. You have to immediately, you know how much the Gita talks about the power of discrimination. You have to immediately discriminate, what is this? And we would say, those of us who are studying Raj Yoga, practicing Raj Yoga, we would say that every circumstance is a potential test. Some sort of provocation will occur because we aren't perfect. We're trying to improve ourselves. So if I am having the weakness of easily getting offended, that means I have a lot of ego. And so some test will come. Someone will do something that I will find offensive, I will react. So the practitioner of Raj Yoga has to instantly, very, very rapidly discern, oh, here's a test of my ego. I have to really make myself humble. I have to be detached, you know, and all of these positionings that you must take internally has to happen very, very quickly. And in Brahma Kumaris Raj Yoga, we talk about Tivra Purusharat, which means rapid effort. So if you are wanting to take the test, pass the test, you have to discern it instantly, figure out what position you have to take, what power you have to apply, what virtue needs to be brought to bear on the situation very, very quickly, so that you perform correctly and the test is passed, and the whole thing happens in a matter of a second. That's Raj Yoga.
Wow. One must care about oneself exceptionally well, very, very well, and hold oneself in high esteem to be able to even start this journey. Is that not the case?
I believe that people who start this journey don't necessarily start with themselves in high esteem. That's one of the struggles that you encounter along the way. If a person already has high esteem, they're ahead, you know, and so it's easier. But you don't necessarily start like that.
The next verse particularly drew my attention because like most people who have an interest in God know that one of God's titles is the Creator. Yet verse 14 reads as follows: the Lord does not create either the agency, which means the means of action, or the actions of people, or the union of action with its fruit. Nature, on the other hand, proceeds in all of this. Two things come to mind, Sister Denise. God is known in many religions, but especially in Hinduism, as the omnipresent one. So how does this verse fit in with that, or vice versa? And secondly, where does nature fit into the picture? And by nature, is he referring to Mother Nature, or is Sri Krishna referring to the law of karma and the law of, well, what I would call natural selection?
It isn't really like that. Here you have the word swabhav.
Okay.
And swabhav doesn't refer to Mother Nature or the planet Earth. Swabhav refers to your nature in that sense. So it's a bit misleading. Now, what it's saying, the way I interpret it, is that, you know, God is not responsible for your makeup. You're responsible for your own makeup, and God will give you instructions But you cannot say, well, God made me like this and therefore it's not my fault. You really have to expect to be held accountable. And there are people who will say that your swabhav is the way you are, and that's that, you can't do anything about it. And so therefore you can lay blame at the feet of God because it's his fault, he made you that way. Because they say God is the creator, so he made me like this, he put me in this caste, this sort of thing. So people will complain. And he's really clearly saying, no, that's nothing to do with me. You have to understand yourself, and you also have to understand your makeup. And that is part of the circumstances of adversity in which you are working as a practitioner of spiritual practice. And so, you know, sometimes people say that human nature can't be changed. And I think what Raj Yoga is telling us is that, well, it can, provided you're linked in yoga with God. You can actually change your nature. But of course it's very, very deep. And to actually change your nature is probably the consequence of a long period of time in spiritual practice, because you're operating at the very deepest level. I think your nature is the deepest level.
Explain, Sister Denise, how the law of karma fits into this picture. It's not specifically mentioned in verse 14 or 15. But it's implied, because verse 15 reads, the Lord does not receive either the evil or the good deeds of anyone. What does that mean? Does it mean again that the Lord is not responsible for the behavior of others, or does it mean something more than that?
In the translation here, there is this issue of where is God? So either God is somewhere and able to perceive what is happening in the different people, in the different places, or God is aware of what's happening because of being everywhere. And the traditional view is that the only way that God can know what's happening at all times is by actually being there. And so the concept of the omnipresence of God is derived from that that kind of thinking. Now in Raj Yoga, as described in the Brahma Kumaris, God is defined as being somewhere, but with the superhuman or non-human capacity to be aware of what is happening in anyone, anywhere. And there are even times where God will say specifically, I am not the one who knows what's going on in everyone at any time. But yet we do experience that God is aware of me and what I'm doing and what I'm feeling, because that's because I'm in relationship with God, so God has that capacity. I rather see God as the observer who sees what we're doing. I see God as the teacher. I may come into a situation that is a very big test for me, and then God will sort of sit back and say, okay, let's see how the student is doing, and then give an assessment. I see it a little bit more like that. So God is not at all responsible for what we do, just as a parent actually cannot be held responsible for what the child is doing, although very often the parent is held responsible. But I think when somebody is an adult, they need to be held responsible for their own actions. And there is a lot of debate about this in the Hindu folklore, which usually holds the parent responsible for the actions of the child even well into adulthood.
I see at the end of verse 15 and moving on to verse 16, the subject of delusion and ignorance comes up, and it reads, "But for those in whom this ignorance of the self is destroyed by knowledge, that knowledge of theirs causes the Supreme to shine like the sun." And Sister Denise, I note that when the word self is used, it's capital S, once again, not small s.
Yeah, I tend to interpret the small lowercase and uppercase s for the self, and you'll also see that the Supreme is capitalized. And the way I interpret this is the body conscious self is the small s, the soul conscious self is with the big S. And I think that...
Sister Denise, to paraphrase you in layman's terms, the small s is somebody who is spiritually unaware, unenlightened.
Yes.
And the capital S is somebody who not only understands things like renunciation and yoga and knowledge, but practices it, the enlightened self.
Yes.
The self-actualized self.
Yes, the self-actualized self.
Okay.
And I think that all of this is connected with the idea of the omnipresence of God, that when a person is in ignorance, they're unaware that God is omnipresent. And when they're aware of that. And so that means that the self is sometimes God and sometimes not God, which doesn't fit with another logic which says God is always God, God is unchangeable. The human soul, however, fluctuates a great deal. And where we're talking about the practice of soul consciousness with lapses into body consciousness, you can see there's a fluctuation that takes place in the soul, but that's not the same thing as the soul being God and not being God. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm.
So I would interpret it like that, and in which case the last line, the Supreme, if it's God, nothing will cause God to shine like the sun. He's already shining like the sun. But the enlightened soul conscious soul will become more similar to God and definitely shine like the sun. I would interpret it that way.
Verse 17 starts with the words, "They whose minds are absorbed in that, in the Supreme, whose selves are fixed on that." Explain what it means, Sister Denise, to not just remember God or be aware of Him, but to have one's mind absorbed in God, absorbed. I get the image of something soaking in liquid.
Yeah.
Yeah, but how do you hold that space in this world and live an ordinary life?
It's not ordinary.
Okay, so you're not ordinary if you can pull this off. But
No.
how does one achieve this? This is an extraordinary stage.
Well, when you learn how to shift in between being connected to the body, interacting in the world as a regular normal person does, and then when you wish, you could disconnect. You connect with God. And then when you wish, you reconnect. It's like a switch on, switch off. You can learn this. And I mean, I think this is one of the very important aspects of the practice of Raj Yoga, to be able to switch from being in the body to being detached from the body. And the moment you're detached from the body, okay, you're in soul consciousness, you're in that higher awareness, you're very close to God. And then when you turn your mind to God and you focused, then you can actually be absorbed in God, because you're on the same level of God and you have moved away from the level of the earthbound, materially minded person, the soul who is in self-forgetfulness.
Mm. Now, Sister Denise, when you speak about what you've just spoken, you're not speaking from your intellect, are you? You're speaking from your personal experience?
You know, we practice these things, And practicing yoga means you have to try and figure out what it is. It will be said to you, okay, there is soul consciousness, there is body consciousness. These are the signs of soul consciousness, these are the signs of body consciousness, and there is a shift of dimension, and then you have to figure it out. And you do that by sitting and practicing and trying, and by doing that you get insights. And I think also when a person is trying to do these things sincerely, God will be aware of that, and God can pull you into a higher state of consciousness so that you then experience it, and then you can commit it to memory, that when I do this, it takes me into this stage, and this is what it feels like. Now I know I'm in my soul consciousness, I'm in my power, and then you can come down. So you're really learning how to shift between dimensions, which is just a slight alteration of the orientation of the mind. And just to speak about it, it doesn't necessarily mean anything, but when you practice it, you really can feel the difference by the change in the atmosphere.
Sister Denise, I noticed that at the end of the 17th verse, it reads that whose basis is that who hold that as the highest object, whose evils have been shaken off by knowledge, go to the end of rebirth. So once again, eternal liberation and moksha is mentioned in this context. It seems that the Bhagavad Gita states that the aim of all of this spiritual effort is to attain what is defined here as the end of rebirth.
You know, the word that's being used here is punarjanam.
Okay.
So punarjanam means you take a birth, you leave your body, you have to take birth again, because this business of birth and rebirth is part of a bondage of karma. And so by learning about pure karma, by learning about how to be karmatit, free from the pull of karma, you can come out of this wheel. This is very much one of the main aims of the Hindu religion, is to come off the wheel of karma. And the idea in traditional Hinduism is that you are evolving. You're moving up the ladder of reincarnations. In some belief systems, you move through the different species, and the highest incarnation is a human being. And then after that, then you go beyond reincarnation. Now, in the Rajyoga of Brahma Kumaris, the idea is to become karmatit, and you want to not reincarnate in Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga being also the last age of a cycle, but you want to come off that cycle, return to what we call the home of souls, Param Dham, Shanti Dham, Nirvan Dham, and then you're back to the seed. You're a seed soul, you're dormant, and you're off earth, as it were. And then when your time comes, according to your karma, so many things, your destiny, you will incarnate, but not because of karmic bondage. You will incarnate because it's the beginning of your existence for the next cycle. So I would interpret it that way, rather than eternal liberation where you just remain in the moksha or mukta state and just stay there.
Sister Denise, we have to say goodbye to you right now, so thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. So there you have it. We have heard what yoga means, what it means to be absorbed in God, to understand the terminology used in chapter 5 that for somebody like me has remained hitherto a mystery. Sister Denise has shared her understanding of all of these concepts and terms, and I think the emphasis is to not just have it in the library of your intellect, but to use it as a mirror in your own life and ask yourself where you are at. This is a self-reflective exercise, not just given for the purposes of intellectual stimulation. So I do hope that you take what you've heard here today into your life and become a better person. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Sister Denise, and we will see you on the next occasion for the continuation of the discussion of Chapter 5. Thank you and good day.